Ladies, gentlemen, and lovers of Elfkind, as always, I am Cosmic, and today we're going to be reviewing Overfall, a fantasy turn-based RPG roguelite that was developed by Para Games and has just recently released from early access. The project originated on Kickstarter and was successfully funded with receiving just over $67,000. As I said, Overfall takes elements of roguelike genres and incorporates them into its core design, which means things like permadeath is in. With each new run of the game, you start with two heroes, and the premise of the title is very simple, that those two heroes were sent through a portal by the Everking on a quest. Now, upon returning, you discover that 3 centuries have passed and that the Everking has disappeared, and in his place, your sworn enemy race known as the Vaughn have showed up raining destruction upon the lands, and now you're tasked with finding the immortal Everking and defeating the Vaughn. Now, while it all sounds quite serious, it is in fact not. The game is packed full of humour, with video game and pop culture references to basically turning classic fairy tales like Red Riding Hood completely on their head in a very funny way. The game does not take itself seriously at all from the get-go and has some really well written dialogue and a really nicely produced cartoon aesthetic that just gel really well. So you'll start the game on the overworld, whereby you sail around it in your little ship, visiting the various islands, picking up quests, enjoying random encounters, and things can branch off in various different ways. There are a ton of races in the game, and the game is actually both about combat and diplomacy. It's about getting various races to help you in your overall quest, and by getting some races to help you, others will not like you, etc, etc, and every choice that you make in the game, regardless of how small the event is, will have an effect in some form. So for example, if I meet a random orc and he is in trouble and I decide to take advantage of that and kill him, then my reputation is going to go down with that particular race. On the overworld map, you do have some minor resource management, such as food and dust. Now, dust is basically the game's currency, so you can use that to purchase various things, and food is used to basically heal your various characters after battle. I really like the open world nature of the game. Now, once you've actually decided to go to an island, you will start an event. Now, this may just be a short one-off event, or it may be the start of a long quest line. There's a really great amount of content in the game. There's a lot of it, and even after multiple runs, I've yet to encounter the same quest over. However, this content repetition will always occur because that's the nature of the beast, and it's a game centered about multiple playthroughs, so you're ultimately going to find a quest that you have done before. Now, thankfully, the great thing about this in terms of content is that Para Games, even as an indie developer, have been very smart from the get-go. They've recognised the critical design flaw of roguelike games, and what they've actually done is built in their own story builder, which allows players to design and build and create their own content, which means that essentially you can play hours and hours of player created content. They have full Steam Workshop capability, which means this feature basically alone nullifies the majority of my complaints with the roguelike genre in terms of their repetitive content. Now, the Overfall developers actually went even further to ensure players produce strong content for themselves and others by partnering up with Obsidian Entertainment's Chris Avallone to create a really comprehensive game writing style guide. And it's something that is actually worth a read, whether you're creating content for the game or not. It's a great read, it's really interesting, and will help a lot of people if they're interested in writing for games content. Ultimately, the inclusion of this story builder and this content builder and the Steam Workshop capability has just really increased the potential longevity and playability of Overfall by leaps and bounds when compared to similar games. It's the single defining feature that will probably save the game in terms of its player base long term. But getting back to the game at hand, now in terms of the content that you get straight out of the box, or at least straight out of the digital code, so to speak, there's a lot of great stuff in there. It's really funny, it's well written, there's some really interesting quest lines, there's some homages to classic folklore, some homages to pop culture references and various other video games, and most of that is very, very funny. There's some hit and misses in there, and some of it's not so great, but the majority is enjoyable, at least the first time round. The best part about most of the quests and most of the content is that there are a ton of diplomatic choices to avoid combat. Now, this in turn often offers its own unique rewards for being more diplomatic than, sword ready. The diplomatic options allow you to take different paths in encounters, some of which can actually access quests that you wouldn't otherwise get, and you'll also unlock characters and equipment that you would not otherwise get if you were not diplomatic. Now, I really like this. It means there's a lot of choice and consequence in the game, and while it isn't on a grand scale, it suffices for the type of game that it's trying to be. And it ultimately means that gunning for a fight every single time will probably be to your disadvantage, and you can potentially miss out on a lot of unlocks. Now, each class in the game also has various dialogue options that's unique to that class, and when it comes to encounters, depending on what classes you have in your party, these options can offer unique resolutions that would otherwise not be available if you had not have that class in your party. That being said, when all said and done and it is time to draw swords, the combat is pretty well put together, I have to say. It's a very simple turn-based system that works from an initiative ladder, and it basically comprises of 3 phases per character. So each character has a movement, utility and attack phase with 2 to 3 abilities in each phase. Now, abilities are based on your character's class and the equipment that you have equipped, which you pre-select before you start the game. For anyone who has played tactical turn-based RPG games before, you'll basically be right at home here, as it doesn't particularly do anything unique or innovative. It's just your straightforward, well-designed, well-executed turn-based system. It works from a hex grid, and while the actual combat is very simplistic, it's all just about a few simple clicks here and there, it's actually deceptively deep in the sense that you have a lot of different classes, a lot of different equipment, a lot of different buffs, debuffs, and all that good stuff. So while it is simplistic to play, it's very easy to pick up, it's very accessible. There is a little bit of depth to that combat beyond the surface of it being very simplistic and very nice to look at. The biggest downside to the combat is actually inherent with the 2D visuals, and while the 2D visuals are very nice, sometimes when there's too many characters on the screen, it's difficult to actually see which hex you are selecting, and it can end up meaning that you miss your attack because you've clicked the wrong tile. Now, this does happen very rarely, however it is a known problem, and I found it to be a little bit of an annoyance, especially with the camera's perspective. The way it is, it just makes the whole target selection issue a little bit dodgy. Now, in terms of progression, characters don't level up as they would in traditional RPG games. Instead, they grow and gain traits, which basically depends on what happens in combat. So if one of your characters gets separated from the group and then basically gets ganked and then comes out with very low health, it's likely that they're going to pick up traits that are negative. Sometimes when you absolutely steamroll an enemy team, you're going to pick up traits that are positive, and these are basically permanent traits that will affect your character's stats in some form. It tends to have a nice balance to buff to debuff ratio. Sometimes you can pick up a few too many debuffs in a go, which makes it feel a little bit stacked against you. But ultimately it isn't too bad. Now, difficulty is a major factor in games that have roguelike elements, and I feel that it is important to have a very good difficulty curve throughout such a game. Now, Overfall starts off well in terms of difficulty, and it's good at the very start. There's a good challenge there. However, I feel that when you actually get to mid-game and your characters have a bunch of traits, and maybe even after your second, third run, and you've picked up some new characters and you've picked up various unlocks, it kind of seems to trail off a little bit, and I feel that it could have been a little bit more difficult than how I found it to be once you really get into grips with the game. The last major problem I have with the game is that it has sometimes excessively long loading times, which seems a bit odd considering the engine and the graphic style of the game shouldn't particularly be too taxing on anybody's machine, and for some reason the game decides to take ages to load, which is just sometimes not that fun. I think that while the game is executed very, very well, and it is a really well executed indie RPG roguelite, ultimately I think that the oversimplistic nature of the execution, especially when it comes to combat, may put a few people off who are looking for something a little bit more tactical, a little bit more in-depth, with a little bit more, I would guess, scope in terms of the combat. At the end of the day, this is no Divinity Original Sin, and it's not trying to be. It's trying to be an indie roguelite RPG that has packed full of humor. It's really nice, it's really well presented, and it is ultimately a very, very, very good indie game. I have to say that I was very, very impressed by the overall execution and amalgamation of mechanics, and I think that the game deserves every success that it gets. It's one of those games that, sure, it's not perfect, but what game is? And I think that if you like turn-based strategy games, you like turn-based RPGs, then you probably like Overfall, and it is sometimes just worth it, especially for the price. It is worth purchasing just to give it a couple of runs, just to experience the humorous content and see what's available. So that's my review of Overfall. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Do like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let me know if you've played the game and what your thoughts were on it, and I will see you next time.